Hello, spot on listeners and viewers. I am very excited about this episode on Spot On. We have a current environment of 24/7 information, and it's just being bombarded and is stressing me out and stressing a lot of us out. We have information fatigue. We know now that there's a correlation between being on social media and mental health. And, spoiler alert, it's not making us mentally happier. I think we all know that. But what I found out recently, and what we're going to talk about today, is there's this thing that all this information chaos is actually making us distrust accurate health and nutrition information. And I'm like, what? So actually, all this misinformation is actually feeding us into believing this misinformation. And we're going to talk to an expert on this in about a moment. So stay tuned. So, okay, spot on listeners and viewers. I brought the man on here, Timothy Caulfield. He's a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health and the research director of the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. He has published almost 400 academic articles and he's won numerous academic and science, communication, and writing awards. He's the author of 5 books. I'm going to talk about his fifth book right now in a second. I'm talking about that. And he's also like this host, producer, director, like on documentaries. It's just terrific. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Spot On.
Joan, thank you for. I always love chatting with you. It's a real honor to be here.
Right. And I just wanted to say that even though Tim is up in Canada and everything, he is really a New England sports fan. So this is why, this is how we bonded. So the man is true, 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 true. All right. You have a new book. This is an interesting name. And then when I read the book, now the name, it's like perfect. So you tell us how you came up with this name and tell us
The
what it is.
certainty. It's called the certainty illusion, as
Mm-hmm.
as you know, and what I tried to capture is the paradox of our current information environment, which is crazy chaotic and Joan, is getting more chaotic every single day. And in the book, I argue that we are in a knowledge crisis. We're in the middle of a knowledge crisis, both a knowledge production crisis and a knowledge dissemination crisis, like on the cusp of a dark age. And the reason I call it the certainty illusion is there's this massive paradox at the core of all of this. There's a bunch of paradoxes, right? First of all, we have more information than we've ever had access to, number one, right? And, we people can get online and look at the New England Journal of Medicine, they can look at Lancet. People can have access to good information, number one. Number two, we crave certainty now. We want to access certainty. But because of the chaos, because we have access to all this information, it creates incentives to exploit and kind of erode the foundations of our knowledge, of knowledge of for all of humanity, right? So we're seeing a distorting of science, we're seeing a distorting of expert opinion, we're seeing a distorting of what I call goodness, and which is really about using virtue to sell products, right? Health halos is the best example in your world, and so there's this huge paradox. Right when we want certainty, the more we want certainty, the more we want certainty, the more certainty becomes a product that can be exploited, the more certainty becomes distorted. It is just a horrible vortex that we're in right now. Now, Joan, it sounds like a dark, dark book, and there's some dark themes in there, no doubt about it. But I do try to have fun with this topic too, believe it or not, because I think it's important to use examples that can relate to all of us.
Absolutely. And you know something, and as all of your books, you give us the information in a very informative and entertaining way. But then at the end, you help us. You give us the safety net. Okay, this is how you can survive this. What I loved in this when I first started reading it, you discussed it a 2022 study from the University of Minnesota that found, just like you said, being subject to all environmental information chaos and conflicting health information and other information too, who are we kidding, causes us to be less receptive to the science and well established research. And I had to read that a couple times. And really, that's what I got of the book. Like, oh my goodness gracious, do we want the certainty? Like you said, these information that we want. And what it's making us do is get away from the accuracy. I just thought it was so interesting. So you divide this book into three illusions. You have the science illusion, the goodness illusion, and the opinion illusion. And let's start with the science illusion and tell us a little bit about this. And I have to tell you, I'm a BU professor here, and I preach stuff on science. I go to the truth. And I read this in the book, and this scared me because I always think that the misinformation, health and nutrition, is by non-professional influencers, and they're just making it up. But really, we got to go to the top. And you brought this up, and this is so true. Can you discuss this whole problem with fake academic journals and what's being published in them, and then how that is feeding into non health professionals, people without a background, and they're spreading this misinformation? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you describe it really well right there, Joan. Like you know this about me. I'm a science geek. I believe that a systematic approach to the accumulation of knowledge is what we need to do. And if we're not, if we don't do that, as I say in the book, what are we going to do? Like, what's the alternative? Your best friend's hunches. We need to have a knowledge production process that we can trust. The problem is, and this is a really good example of the paradox, the more science, everyone says, more science informed, science says this, the studies sit back. No one is selling a health product that says this product was made with less science, right? So it's all, science as a marketing strategy has won, and I call it science exploitation. But unfortunately, with that we get the distortion of science. We get science hype, we get predatory journals, we get vanity journals, and where they're really just journals that they're fake journals, where people publish whatever fits their ideology with their agenda and make it look like an academic study, and all of those things pollute the academic literature to a degree to which it becomes difficult even for the scientific community to cut through the noise. And I'm sure you've been following this too, Joan. There's always been issues with low quality, especially in health and nutrition, low quality journal studies, or studies that are overinterpreted because they're observational studies. That's always been an issue. But now we're also, in addition to that, getting so much work being done in predatory journals where systematic reviews and meta-analysis are including them. They're in major databases, and it's just becoming incredibly polluted. And one of the reasons of that, and I argue in the book, really goes to the systemic issue here. The academic system's a little broken. Joan, you and I have been at this for a while. Imagine being an assistant professor. You and I don't have to imagine much because we have friends that are in this position. The pressure to publish, the pressure to get quantity out there, the incentives baked into the academic system don't really help. I'll put it that way. They invite a gaming of the system. They invite quantity over quality. So right at the very top, as you said at the start there, we need to rejig the system to make sure we have good science, good trustworthy science, but then we also need to recognize as consumers, as individuals, that the label, the brand of science can be exploited to sell products.
I teach at obviously at Boston University, and the first thing we teach a big nutrition course, to which I wrote a textbook, and we talk about credible nutrition information. So I used to say for 100 years, oh, it's got to be published in a peer reviewed journal. And I can't now. I change it. Now I say it's got to be published in a peer review journal that's credible. That because there's journals. There's like the journal's like a ABC journal, and so just having it published doesn't make it that it's really really sound. And what you said is, these kind of studies that are really hodgepodge are being put in when people do these searches are being put in, and what scares the death out of me is AI. So will
Yeah, yeah.
AI now take all of these cockamamie journals that have no credibility and put them in and come up with information that's not accurate?
You're so right, and I'll tell you, incorporating the AI situation into this book was incredibly challenging
Yes.
because it was evolving month to month as I was writing it. And whenever you write a book like this, you want it to have evergreen relevance, right? So there's a couple of chapters in there that I joke about how fast this is evolving. And you're right. The scary thing with AI, yes, it's going to make spreading misinformation easier, but it's also you can create a fake ecosystem. So you can create a social media post that is fake. You can create a press release that post is based on that's fake, and you can create a study that. So even if you were going to take the time to dig into, to fact check, you might be met with this entire ecosystem of nonsense that backs up the assertion. So that is really really scary.
I guess
One of the things I argue in the book is that this, and there's some ironies here. This does, I think, heighten the value of the body of evidence. Right? Always turn to the body of evidence and making sure avoid that single study syndrome. Right? One study, especially for something as complex as nutrition and health more broadly. Right?
mm-hmm.
Never fall for it requires a body of evidence. Right? The other thing is, and this is the ironic part, I think it heightens the value and the importance of credible experts
Right.
that actually do know the literature and can help guide us through. But the problem with that is we're in this era where experts are demonized, and there's smear campaigns that are both of us has probably experienced this, that try to delegitimize and silence experts. So there's just so much going on right now that makes our information environment messy and difficult to untangle.
I always tell my students, one study is no study. So I mean, just go
Yeah,
one
that's a
study.
great saying. I love it.
Yeah. So don't yeah. It's consensus is when you have the bulk of the information repeating the same thing. You
But
know.
Joan, you know what happened? And I've written some articles on the value of scientific consensus, and right now what they do, I want to be, I sound like a conspiracy theorist myself. I have to be careful, but those who are sort of lean anti-science, they discredit it by trying to make it sound like it's groupthink or it's a memo that we've received from the big pharma star chamber, or when the reality is science is hard. It's messy. It's
Right.
thousands of studies done by independent researchers that kind of point in a particular direction, right? It's always contested, right? It's always messy. That's the scientific consensus. And so I think we need to do a better job communicating that.
That's right. And we got to stop it. We want the answer now. It takes time for good science to evolve and get that consensus. However, you said in this book, and we all know this, these algorithms that social media sites use that push up in ratings or get pushed out, the crazy cuckoo journals with the inaccurate science. So not only that this nonsense gets published, but then it gets promoted like it's like the greatest thing on social media.
You're 100% correct, and we can even go further, Joan. We can highlight the impact of retracted science. So these are, let's go to the extreme. So a study's been published maybe in a bad journal, and it's so bad that it's gone through the process and has been retracted. That in some circles becomes a badge of honor.
Yes.
There was a study that just came out recently that highlights this because it becomes, see, I told you this was true. It's so true that it's being retracted and silenced and marginalized because they want to hide the truth.
That's right.
We saw, of course, we see that with vaccine research a lot. The Wakefield study on autism, the horrible lie is the best example of it. But we're seeing it again and again and again. And this study on the politicization of retractions found exactly that, right? That a retraction is used to highlight its validity, right. Not to show that it's wrong, but to highlight its validity because it runs counter to the scientific consensus, right? So it's just just an incredibly difficult situation that we're facing.
Right. And also, can you tell everybody what the Dunning-Kruger effect is? And I thought this was terrific. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect. And by the way, it's incredibly, there have been a number of studies on it. And we have to be careful not to overinterpret these studies because it's one of those phenomenon that's hard to study well. But the body of evidence, the body of evidence tells us that very often those that think they know the most about a topic and are the most opinionated about it are the ones that know the least about it, right? The least about it. And they've studied this with GMOs, they've studied it with vaccines, they've studied it with climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a pretty strong, consistent phenomenon. And people should remember that when they're looking at a statement, a definitive statement online. In the book, I argue one of the antidotes to this is scientific humility, right? We always need to, and you've already done it, Joan, in this interview. You've talked about how science takes time and it's hard and there's uncertainties built into science. That the more that people embrace that notion, the less likely they are to fall for misinformation, the less likely they are to spread misinformation. And I suggest that we should all try this exercise, that you make a list of things that you've changed your mind on because, or even, modified your opinion based on evidence, right? And if you can't do that, see the Dunning-Kruger effect, because I have a long list, and you should. It's a badge of honor to have to change your mind based on the evidence. That shows that you're doing the right thing, that you're a scientist. And I have this list, some funny and some serious, that I'm always kind of evolving my opinions on things. And I think that's a good thing. It's not flip-flopping. That's a good thing.
Right. I forget who said this, Tim, but somebody said, it's really, really easy to talk with such powerful, emotion and support when you don't know what you're talking about.
It's true. There's this phenomenon, and this is research that came out after I finished the book. And my friend Stephen Lewandowski and all of his colleagues have written about this. It's called truth speaking, fact speaking versus belief speaking. Have you heard about this?
No.
And we're in the belief speaking era. And as soon as I describe it, you'll know what I mean. So, and they've done empirical research on this. So the fact speaking is old school facts. They're tethered to evidence and science. Belief speaking is you just say something emphatically enough, with enough passion, right? With enough conviction. Tucker Carlson is a master at this, right? It doesn't matter what the truth is, especially if what the statement, if it resonates with you, right? And so another group of researchers talk about the gist. If you believe the gist, you may not believe it's literally true, but you believe the gist of it. And that's the era we live in now. So you may not think that immigrants are eating cats and dogs, right? But you believe the gist of the sentiment. So you believe, you repeat the entire narrative. And that's where we are right now. And as you said, you can say these things emphatically, it lands.
Right. And, that's all about, you're talking in the book about confirmation bias. So you just keep going back to these sources that you believe in and and they just keep on telling you the same darn things over and over again. You pick your news.
Yeah, and we all do this too. That's the other important thing to recognize. We all live in an echo chamber to a greater or lesser extent, and we all have our biases. And I'm guilty of. I always overinterpret. I love exercising and the whole exercise. I always overinterpret exercise research because I love the conclusion. Get out there and move. When a lot of it's correlation data, there's small studies. So we have our own biases. Recognize them and be prepared to look at the body of evidence.
Right. All right. So that was the science illusion. Now tell us about the goodness illusion. What the heck is that?
So I think this is your wheelhouse,
Oh
Joan.
God,
This
yes.
is this is where you live. So because look, it's a broad phenomenon, but in the book I really focus a lot on not totally, but a lot on nutrition science. So the goodness illusion is so let's just talk about marketers, right? They play on this desire for certainty, right? The desire to do what's right for yourself and for your family and for your community. I call this the goodness illusion. And the best, most straightforward example of it, health halos, right?
Right.
Um, buy non-GMO, buy organic, right?
Listen, I
Buy
want to tell you,
locally grown.
I only drink non-GMO water.
Yeah, non-GMO, gluten-free water, and locally grown, right? That's a
Yes.
and we can have you could have interesting conversations about what does the evidence say about non-GMO or even locally grown, right? But they're complex topics. But that's not how it's presented to you. It's presented as definitive, right? Non-GMO, better. Locally grown, better. It's a shortcut, right? It's a shortcut to decision making, a shortcut to goodness, and it's playing on our chaotic information environment and providing you with a simple answer. So that's what I explore all that in that chapter. And as you know well, you probably know this literature really well, all the fascinating studies that have been done in this space. And then I also talk about new ones, like protein who would have guessed? I can remember carbo loading. I'm old enough to remember carbo loading. And now you stick protein on the side of something, it's a candy bar with protein on the side of it, and it's all of a sudden magically healthy. But I also talk about things like being more manly. That's become masculinity's become a new health halo,
I
right?
love that.
And there are all these
I
other
love this.
fascinating
I
ones.
just gotta tell everybody, this section of the book is so fascinating and so, I hate to say this, spot on. But this whole manly men thing, where men have to be more manly, and you talk about that. So you go ahead, give us a little
Yeah,
snippet
the
of the manly
masculinity,
men.
and this is a real incredible phenomenon. Let's
Yes.
be honest, it had an impact on the election.
Mhm.
Like this
Yes.
is how when I first started writing about it, it was a little more niche, and it over the last couple of years, it has exploded into an international phenomenon where you have these influencers who are leaning hard into, and for brevity's sake, we'll call it traditional masculine norms, and
Mhm.
saying that if you are more manly, you will be better, you'll be better for society, and society will be better, right? And Joan, I did a documentary on this topic for CBC called Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, where we explored this even further. um, the reality is, look, and I want to be clear, if people enjoy that aesthetic, if people enjoy those kinds of relationships, awesome. I'm not judging, and that's one of the things I definitely learned from doing the documentary. Right? We can all be happy embracing different kinds of norms, right? Of different kinds of views of manhood, but it's not going to make you healthier. It's not going to make you better. It's not going to make society. There's no evidence to support that at all. On the contrary, most evidence tells us that embracing traditional masculine norms can have adverse impact on your health by more risky behavior, not necessarily healthy diets. A big one is avoiding health advice. You don't seek help. More loneliness, less friends. Listen to this: poorer relationships, poorer sexual relationships. With a little irony there.
Mhm.
Uh, Poor sexual functioning, things like erectile dysfunction. Again, more irony there.
Right.
And of course, it's also so we have to be careful. These are all association studies, right? Also associated with increased domestic violence, partner violence. So yeah, it's a ridiculous emerging norm that likely has adverse. Again, we got to be careful not to overinterpret that research, but the evidence is pointing in the direction of yeah, this ain't true.
And also, what was very, very interesting in the book, what you cited, which is so true, to be this whole thing, I need to be more manly man, so I can eat cottage cheese. I can eat yogurt. You know what I mean? And so you said in the book, which I thought was very, very interesting. So they're more less likely to eat a well balanced plant based diet with variety because they think they're certain only manly men food. You know, which is so interesting. So they really are when you're talking about doing things to stay manly man that are unhealthy because they're not eating some of the foods that they think are not manly.
And it's another real irony because part of being this manly man ethos is to be big and strong and healthy, and the manly man norms are pushing them away from things that are healthy. And the other interesting thing, and again, I've said this caveat I think like 4 times, I'm going to say it a fifth time, it is hard to study this well. So we always have to be careful not to overinterpret. These are studies that are suggesting things, but they've done studies that have found that when a man's masculinity is threatened, right? Even if they're, lean, very liberal or something like that, they are more likely to order steak,
Right.
which is just bizarre, which shows you the power of these social norms. It's just not a constructive trend on a social level. With that huge caveat that if this is what you enjoy, I'm not there to judge you, right? If this is what makes you happy and make you feel more fulfilled, knock yourself out.
Right. But the problem with that, Tim, is like then crazy cuckoo diets evolve. The carnivore diet. Okay. So they're only gonna eat, meat or a lot of meat, and they're not eating certain food. There are people now who have followed the carnivore diet, just little meat, and have gotten scurvy. I
Oh my God.
mean, I mean, who gets
Well, you
scurvy?
know about the Liver King, right? Do you know about the Liver King?
And I've heard of this. Tell me more.
Yeah, the Liver King, I'm sure, is a very. I love referencing him because it demonstrates, I think, how we live in echo chambers. Because, I'll give a public lecture, and most of the audience has, this is the first time they've ever heard of this individual. But within certain communities, he's a superstar. I think he has over 6 million followers on, I want to say, on TikTok. Over 100 million, likes and impressions. Like he's an individual that pushes this manly man ethos. He is hugely jacked, it's big beard, and he eats only meat
Yeah.
and lots of raw liver and things like that. And and by the way, he was caught in a scandal because it was disclosed that he was actually on steroids. It wasn't the raw liver that made him look like that, but
No
that didn't diminish
kidding.
his. It didn't diminish. Yeah, no, big
No.
shocker, right? Shocker.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't diminish his popularity.
Yeah.
That reveal. So yeah, it's just really incredible, it is an absurd and a kind of a funny movement, but it's doing real harm. If you are a young adult, you're a teenage boy and you're trying to find your path forward, these kinds of pressures are terrible. You know,
Terrible.
to give
Terrible.
you this narrow view of what a man is, there's so many ways you can be, express your masculinity. There's no one narrow path. It's about being your authentic self.
Females have fought with disordered eating and poor body image forever. And now males are the same thing because of
Yeah.
these kind of information that's out there in the media. And it's just, as you again said, that, we've lost sight of accurate science based information and now are hanging on to these liver king or whatever he is. That's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. The third illusion, and I am so guilty of this, is the opinion illusion. and the good, the bad, and the ugly of online reviews. And how accurate are they really? And a product that's going to do tell you to do blank or whatever, and all these great online reviews, or more importantly, the flip side of that, a wonderful health professional gets these negative reviews. So let's talk about that, the opinion illusion.
Yeah, again, I picked a topic that I hope would really relate to people, and holy cow, I for sure picked the right topic because as you highlighted, everybody I talked to said, you use online, we all use online reviews for absolutely everything. So it's a really good example of the certainty illusion because we go to it to get certainty, to get some kind of clarity on what to inform a decision we're going to make, be it about a restaurant, be it about a vacation, or I joke in the book about buying a dishwasher, and that's an absolutely true story. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, my amazing wife, who I do not deserve, was sitting next to me. Our dishwasher had just broken, and I was working on that chapter. And she goes, "Oh, look at these online reviews for dishwashers." And I'm saying, those are all fake. And yeah. But this one's got a great review. We can't stop ourselves.
No,
So the
right?
research tells us that at a minimum, the vast majority of reviews are manipulated in some way. Now, so what I mean by at a minimum, some of them are out and out fake, right? Some of them are incentivized, and then a large portion of them are just subject to all the cognitive biases that we all are, right? Whenever you're reviewing a product, and they are tremendously influential. Just
Right.
absolutely tremendously influential. If your review of something, if you have a 3.9 or 3.8 on for a product or what, no one's even going to see it because a lot of people set their filter at 4.
Right.
It is an incredible economy. This is one of the topics I became most fascinated with because a lot of the other topics I've done research on, and by the way, we've done research on online reviews now in the health space. We've done it with medicine practitioners, bogus cancer clinics. So we've actually dug into this quite a bit, our research team, and it's just horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. And the healthcare sector one is a really good example. Depending on what study you looked at, anywhere between 70 and 90% of patients check to
Yes.
find their review of their healthcare provider before they go. It's the
Hmm.
number one tool they use. Some research tells us it's more powerful than families and or friends' advice or other professionals' advice. And Joan, it has absolutely no connection to your clinical outcome. Like there's no correlation between your online review and your actual health. And some suggest it might be inverse, right?
Okay.
And there might be
I want to know,
problems
Tim,
with relying
why
on it.
why do we why because I do this. Why do I do this? Why do I look at those reviews even though I have an IQ up slightly above room temperature? Why do follow them? Why?
And it is amazing. Like, so I interviewed all these experts all over the world, as I say in the book, and I actually asked them. So they're like, I talked to them for like 2 hours over Zoom, and we continued our conversations after. And then near the end, I asked them, so they've been like demonizing online reviews, and I go, so do you use them? And they all go, yeah, I do. So it is incredible the pull, and of course, to go back to the theme of the book, that power that they have over us almost guarantees that they're going to be manipulated, right?
Right.
Because they're so valuable. The built-in sort of incentives, the economy of the world economy means they're going to be manipulated. They can't afford not to manipulate them. But why are we attracted to them? They are stories. They are easy to access. They provide that sense of certainty. They provide the wisdom, the illusion of the wisdom of crowds. They just seem so appealing. And the other thing is a little bit of a Dunning-Kruger phenomenon here that we all have, a little peppering of Dunning-Kruger in all of us. We all think, yeah, I know they're fake, but I can get value out of them, right? I have the ability to see the AI generated review, or to find the review that's going to speak to me. And again, the irony there is if it's speaking to you, that's exactly what those who are trying to manipulate you want to do. They want to find someone they think is like you and that's going to speak your language, that's going to trick you into believing this review.
So, in other words, I should be thankful that I subscribe to Consumer Reports so that when
Yeah.
my dishwasher goes, I go to them first. Okay, all right, so that's good for no. I'm gonna stay subscribing to them. All right, so we have these illusions. Help us, hun. Please help. So at the end, you give us this life-saving advice. There's a certainty sick. So we know these illusions are very, very, appealing and lure us in here. But what can we do to save ourselves?
Well, I start the conclusion with this really with a wish that's aimed at society more broadly. And I started at the beginning talking about this. We really do need to make sure that we are creating trustworthy evidence. So that means good science. That means trustworthy journals. That means communicating science accurately to the public and in a way that's engaging and meaningful. So that we have to do that. I think this is a generational issue, and this should be a priority for governments around the world. Unfortunately, I don't think we have in a lot of countries. It's I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen, but with enough
Tomorrow.
pressure, and I invite readers to put pressure on their politicians, right, on this topic. So we need to do that. The other thing we need to do is just having these conversations matter. I think recognizing that the information environment is rigged against us, I think is important. That's valuable too. And it sounds dark and it can create this over skepticism where you don't trust anything. But so you do need to recognize also that the good information is out there, right?
And
Know that the good
remember, one
information is,
study is no study. Let's remember
yeah,
that.
no, one study is, there are trustworthy voices
Right.
there. Look for that body of evidence, and as I highlight in the book at the end, most of us know what the body of evidence is for a lot of the big topics.
Right.
Most of us, I think, intuitively know what a healthy lifestyle is, right, Joan?
Right.
It's you don't smoke, you drink less,
Right.
you exercise, you eat healthy, and a whole bunch of variation there, right, Joan?
Right.
You get a good night's sleep, you take preventative strategies, and you surround yourself with people you love and be in a good community. There's no magic, right? And
Right.
of course, you've got to pick good parents and make sure your socioeconomics are awesome. But there is no magic, right? And so I think we need to remind ourselves. We know for a lot of topics what the scientific consensus is. So always remember that when you're evaluating stuff online, and then also recognize that I call it science exploitation. That happens. That there's science hype and science exploitation. As you said off the top, science is hard. It can take time. There are very few magical breakthroughs. Um, remember that. Remember that, and turn to the body of evidence.
Uh, Great. And marketing too. You said one of your wonderful certainty six is marketing. So goodness in marketing. Watch for that, huh?
Watch for that. Get a sense of what is that person trying to sell you. And it may not just be a product, even though increasingly I think the word is supplement. Everyone's trying to sell you a supplement, but recognize they might be trying to sell you a brand, just their brand, and you see podcasters do that a lot. Not you, of course,
Right.
and or they're trying to sell you an ideology.
Mhm.
You're always trying to get a sense of what they're trying to say. Marketing, be aware at a minimum that it's lurking in the background very often.
Right, right. And the last one I like, well, funny that I use that word. It's like what you like. So explain that.
I yeah, I love this one too, and that's I think it's one of the reasons it's the last one, right? Because so much of the our information environment is trying to nudge us into certain preferences. It's trying to tell you that your opinion is wrong. Like what you like, and in that's one of the sections where I try to have a little bit of fun. I love music. I'm a huge music fan, and I'm very passionate about music. And um, I, for too much of my life, I worried about my tribe. I'm a punk rocker, right? So I couldn't like other music because of the marketing and the brand and the iconography. Like what you like, whether it's, a healthy food, music. And the other interesting thing, and there's actual research on this, actual studies on this, you know what? You might find new communities, and you might find that you have things in common with people you didn't know you'd have things in common with, and those can be bridges to a consensus that means much more than just a scientific consensus.
Right. Well, the name of this fifth book is The Certainty Illusion: What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. And oh boy, does it matter. It's a great read. It is really, really, it's an easy read because everything you write is an easy read, but it's truly, truly eye opening. And we need, especially in this day and age, to really, really, think before you like something, or think before you accept something and say, wait a minute, doesn't sound right. And so let's go back to the experts that are truly experts in the field and stick with their help and guidance. And something, just because you have a million followers on social media doesn't mean you're an expert in all fields, and especially in health and nutrition. It's just that you have a million followers on social media. That's it. And only, but in your case, it's okay because you have a million followers and you are accurate. So with that, I want to thank Tim Caulfield for being on Spot On, and please buy his book. We're going to put a picture of it on the Spot On Facebook page, and go get it immediately and read. And Tim, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Joan. Always, always a pleasure.